Today we continue our series on Nehemiah, who was the cupbearer to the Persian king in 445 BC. And Nehemiah had been born in this foreign land to Jewish parents, and he had a deep love and respect for Jerusalem and for his God, the great and awesome God. And last week, Peter told us that Nehemiah mourned for days when he heard about the dilapidation of the Jerusalem wall and how things weren't going well for the Jews who returned from captivity. We also heard how Nehemiah prayed for God's promise to be fulfilled, so that Jerusalem would be restored, so they would be a blessing to the nations. So just before we continue to read Nehemiah's memoirs, actually, my grandma wrote memoirs, handwrote them, and my sister typed them, and it's really special to see what people have written firsthand. So I just have a short story of restoration that's closer to home. So in 2010, I went on holiday to Samoa with my daughter's family, and we stayed in a place called Taupo Beach Palace in Laupang, which is one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and one day I'd like to take my husband there. And 1 year earlier, they had Samoa had the worst ever natural disaster, and this particular resort was the hardest hit, and it was completely destroyed by a tsunami at 22-meter wave. So you can see that's the same, pretty much the same beach. And the couple who owned the beach lost 13 members of their family, a 97-year-old granddad, and the youngest was a 9-month-old baby. And the resort owners spent 6 weeks in hospital recovering from serious injuries, and they were heartbroken. They lost their loved ones, they lost their livelihood in their home, but they said to each other, what took us 20 years to build before the tsunami, we will rebuild. And they managed to restore their lives in under a year, and we were one of their first guests. So Nehemiah was also overcome when he realized the shocking condition of his homeland, but nothing was going to stop him from his vision to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. So someone's kindly put Bibles on the table that you might like to follow along in Nehemiah chapter 2, and it's on page 395. Early the following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I had never before appeared sad in his presence. So the king asked me, why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me, you must be deeply troubled. And I was terrified, but I replied, long live the king! How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. So actually, a little bit of work had started on the Jerusalem wall, but this king had complete all work and ceased, and we know that from Ezra. So the king's actions had been partly to cause Nehemiah's sadness. Now, God puts us in jobs where we're going to make a difference and where he can use us. And as one of the cupbearers to the king, Nehemiah had a very prestigious position. He was checking the king's food and drink, wasn't poisoned. And cupbearers also did administration. And bringing his personal problems into the royal court had the potential to get him executed. But he knew that this was the right time to say something. So he appeals to the king's soft side by saying he's upset about the city where his ancestors are buried. He doesn't actually mention Jerusalem there. The king asked, how can I help you? With a prayer to the God of heaven, and actually this is a beautiful spontaneous prayer. and perhaps a prayer that's asking God, make me bold. And you know, in those days you weren't even allowed to breathe in front of the king. So he would have been like, if it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. So it took absolute huge courage. And Persians are also renowned for having creative ways of executing people. And I started to do some research on this, and to be honest, I couldn't read it. It was, I thought it might add a little bit of interest to my talk, but it was too horrible to read about. So his fear was understandable, we will just say that, but he knew that God was on his side. When Jesus sent out the 12 to heal the sick and preach the good news, he told them that they're going to come up against opposition, they're going to come up against kings and governors and officials, and he said, don't be afraid of these powerful people. Don't worry about what to say, and the Spirit of God will give them the right words. And don't be afraid of what they can do to you, because they can kill the body, but they can't kill the soul. I also said to the king, if it please the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself. And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. So when I came to the province west of Euphrates River, I delivered the king's letter to them. The king, I should add, had sent along army officers and horsemen to protect me. So not only had the king reversed his stop work decree upon the wall, all Nehemiah's requests were granted and more. He was given complete authority to do the job. He's made governor of Judah, and God's blessing accounted for this. And Hudson Taylor is a Baptist missionary to China, and he said, God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supply. And of course, we have just seen what God did for Nehemiah. And if you just have a quick look at verse 10 in your Bibles, you'll see that Nehemiah immediately encounters political opposition from some very bitter, nasty fellows called Sanballat and Tobiah, who were displeased that someone had come to help the Israelites. And Nehemiah continued to be opposed, yet he had given up his comfortable palace in exchange for leading the ordinary people to restore their land. As one man, he had significant impact on the nation. And Jesus did the same for us. He willingly gave up his exalted position to come down to earth to be with us, ordinary people, to restore and reconcile us. Nehemiah loved and served others, and Jesus did the same. So, verse 11. So I arrived in Jerusalem. 3 days later, I slipped out during the night, taking only a few others with me. I had not told anyone about the plans God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. We took no pack animals with us except the donkey I was riding. So you can't start a huge project without first checking it out. So he took a few trusted people to go with him to inspect the walls, and they did this quietly so that it didn't alert the enemies of God's people. When Samoa was hit with the tsunami, our then Prime Minister and other officials went to Samoa to look at the damage so that they could support the Samoa government with a huge cleanup task. So you need to see things with your own eyes. And at that point, Nehemiah's initial assessment had only been from what he'd been told. So here's a picture of Jerusalem. And so that evening, they came out of the valley gate, came down to the dump gate, which is where they dump all their rubbish, up to the fountain gate. And here, the rubble was so bad that the donkey couldn't get through. So he hopped off his donkey, walked up the Kidron Valley on foot, then went back down and back into the valley gate. And then the city officials did not know I'd been out there or what I was doing, for I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in administration. So now that he knew what was involved, it was the right time to act and share with the Jewish leaders what God had put on his heart. So he says to them, you know very well what trouble we are in. Notice he says, we are in, so he's including himself here. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me and about my conversation with the king. So he encouraged them all to come together and rebuild the wall so that they would no longer feel shame, they'd also be protected. And he said the king backed him, but ultimately this was God's plan. And they said, yes, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the good work. But the same nasty local fellows, plus a new opponent, Geshem the Arab, started to mock them against the king. But Nehemiah replied, the God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding this wall, but you have no share, legal right, or historic claim in Jerusalem. So Nehemiah knew that nothing was impossible for God. There was no need to fear these enemies, and because God, the God of heaven, will give them success in building the wall. And that's what the obstacle course was about. Trusting God and getting over obstacles. So just going back to this picture. So here again is the map. Now, if you have a look at chapter 3, it's not actually placed chronologically. It's a list describing who built what and in which part of the wall. So there were 41 sections, and you can see those sections written in red. And he started from the top, the sheep gate, the priest fixed the sheep gate, and then in chapter 3 describes all the people who fixed the wall going in an anti-clockwise direction down and then back up to the sheep gate. And Nehemiah organized work crews to repair each section. And most people did the repairs near their own home. And it was 2.5 kilometers around. And there is, if you have a look in verse 5, there's it says, the leaders of Tekoa refused to work. One translation says, the nobles of Tekoa refused to put their shoulders to the work. So I started to have a little chuckle to myself, thinking, oh, these guys got mentioned because they're lazy. And but then God reminded me that I could be just the same. And I thought about when I recently went to our English class, and there was this huge pile of dishes on the person, the group that had used the rules before. And I said, I'm not doing these dishes, I'm just doing our dishes. We only had about 5 dishes. So Lesley did not put his shoulders to the work of the Lord. That spoke to me about being hardworking and diligent. After the Samoan disaster, many people and organisations stepped up to help, working really hard to rebuild the homes, schools, roads and clinics. Actually, 150 people died and 3,500 people were left homeless. So it's really inspiring how so many people were willing to stop what they were doing and go over there and help. And staying at the same resort as us were some Habitat for Humanity builders, and they had left their families, their jobs, and they were still working there a year after the disaster to help with the rebuild. And likewise, Nehemiah just about mentioned they were by name in that chapter 3, showing that he was appreciative that they were God's willing servants. They all deserve to be recognized. And none of them are listed as stonemasons or builders. They were just all manner of people, goldsmiths, priests, rulers of various regions, a man and his daughter, and they all worked hard and cooperatively. So some final thoughts. I think I'm a little tiny bit like Nehemiah. I'm a good administrator, I'm organised, I like to research things. And about 12 years ago, I heard for the first time about other classes doing English lessons. And new immigrants are always very open to Jesus. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'd love to do that. And and the Bible says, love the foreigner in the land. So I prayed with a retired pastor, and we prayed that at the right time, the right people would all come together. Then I started to visit other English classes at different churches and talking to the ministry leaders. I also did a 6-month teaching course, which was full-time while I was working full-time. It nearly killed me. And there were many challenges and obstacles to overcome, but finally God made it happen, and I took on joint leadership of the English Honor in 2015. Thankfully, I was determined to become part of this. I would not have met my lovely husband, and I probably wouldn't even be standing here today. So, care about what God cares about. Nehemiah is really inspiring. He loved God, and it was because of his relationship with God that he was able to align himself with the will of God. If we absolutely know in our hearts that something is God's will, then God will make it happen. Overcome fear to do God's will. Nothing was going to stop Nehemiah. God helped him overcome the fear of approaching the king, the fear of what to say, the fear of being horribly executed. He had the courage to leave the home he'd always known, and he wasn't afraid of hard work. He took on a demanding task, and he faced ridicule and intimidation. Jesus said, don't be a man for what they can do to you, so be bold and take action. Nehemiah was a man of prayer, but he was a willing participant in being the answer to his own prayers. Nehemiah didn't rush into things. He prayed, he checked things out, he kept praying, and when the time was right, he took action. So I have some discussion questions for you. So do you see a real need in your life, community, or church that God has put on your heart? And how could you overcome any fears that might stop you from doing what God would have you do?